Hey, I'm Jan.
And I'm Jared.
And we're both librarians at Manhattan Public Library. Welcome to the ReadMHK podcast. ReadMHK is a community-wide reading program aimed at building connections through books and sharing experiences with each other.
Each month, we speak with a local community member, talk about books based on a theme, and offer reading suggestions. Our theme this month is dystopian fiction. These are stories that often use issues we are currently experiencing, like natural disasters and civil unrest, and takes them to their extreme, leading to the downfall of society or even the planet.
Whether you're in the mood for a fantastical story set in the distant future or looking for a world set in the present day that feels eerily similar to our own, dystopian fiction has got you covered. Our theme this month was inspired by the K-State First Read book choice of the Marrow Thieves.
Our guest today is Tara Coleman, an associate professor at Kansas State University Libraries. She is also the programming services coordinator for their new Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab, as well as the coordinator for K-State First Book, which we will be talking a little bit about today. When she is not busy coordinating things, she likes to...
do so many things. I like to spend time with my peoples. I love to enjoy food socially. I like to read books with my eyes and my earballs. Spend time, with my people. So that's how I'm ending it. People and people.
People and people. Social interactions.
With chosen social actions.
The chosen few.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the first book Tara remembers reading as a child is...
Can I tell you a story?
Yes.
They probably still do book fairs in school.
Mm-hmm.
I earned what we called Pacer bucks, and I got to buy a book at the bookstore in the cafeteria for the book sale. And I bought a book called Can You Keep a Secret? Because the main character's name was Tara. I don't remember the author. I just remember reading this book over and over because it was the first book I bought and picked out. I don't know if it was a good book, but it was really monumental to me because I think at the public library, I was only allowed to have 2 books at a time or something very reasonable for a child. So I had this book that I could do with whatever I wanted, and it's still very special to me.
That's wonderful. I love that story. That's great.
Do you still have the book?
I think I lost that in the whole moving away to college process, or I gave it away. I'm hoping I gave it to someone.
It's living on a farm somewhere, being read by other children.
To their dogs.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a child whose name is also Tara.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like the Traveling Pants, the sisterhood.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for joining us today, Tara.
Thank you for the invite. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. Can you tell us a favorite memory you have related to books and or libraries?
Okay. So my favorite book memory is probably the one where I bought the book at school, but I have a very special place in my heart for the public library I grew up with at Newton Public Library. I hung out there after school, like so many kids do at public libraries. And it was such a second home for me. It had air conditioning. We only had window units. They had art that children couldn't check out, but I think I spent lots of time looking at it. It just seemed really fancy. I think it was just checked out by people who lived in maybe senior living homes and they would get it for 3 months. But it was just such an awesome thing. And then I just remember being able to look at pattern books, all these things that I was never going to have in my house. And I loved it. My second job was working at that library as a high school student. And it was really awesome to be able to be there. I was there as we transitioned to a online catalog. We got a Dynex computers or Dynex library system. Only special or important to anyone who works in the library.
I remember Dynex from my first stint.
Yes, and then we slowly transitioned away from the card catalogs, and what a big deal that was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful.
The 90s.
So do you still go back there? Is it in the same building?
It's the same building.
Okay.
I haven't been there in a long time. I need to go in and explore. I'm sure it's very different from what I remember.
I remember I go into my childhood library in Abilene, and it smells exactly the same. It just takes you back to exactly what it was like, a few years ago.
Yes, just a few.
Just a few.
Yeah.
It's a Carnegie library, isn't it?
It is a Carnegie library. Mm-hmm.
This is my first library, Manhattan Public Library, and it is completely different from when I was a child. Because our technology center used to be the children's room, which is now smaller, not only because I'm bigger, but they walled off different areas in that space.
And our children's library is amazing.
A true story.
It is. Yeah. If you had to be trapped in the world of a book, what book would you choose?
So I thought about this question a lot. And I think so my favorite genre of leisure reading is urban fantasy. And there's an author called Alona Andrews, and she writes the Hidden Legacy series. And I think that's where I would get stuck. Urban fantasy, people have magic, and it's not a Harry Potter magic. It's through years of whatever, some people have the ability to like force the truth out of people, and other people are able to like control animals and things like that. So that's my book that I listen to, like favorite spots in the audiobook on a timer before I go to bed. That would be my place.
I like that. All right. The age-old question, do you judge a book by its cover?
Yes. I think everybody does. And I think it's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because the cover is a lie.
Totally.
I think that this is what people will buy. Sometimes it's because it's sort of tricking you into thinking it's something else. Other times because it's really beautiful or striking in some way, not always beautiful. And I remember when I went to library school, I took a children's lit class, and children's lit is not my thing. I have a lot of respect for it. And I remember reading a book, Bud Not Buddy. And depending on whether or not you had the hardbound copy without a cover or you purchased the paperback, you didn't know if the young man in the book was black or white. And that led to some fascinating discussions because the people who had the hardback were of a certain demographic and were shocked and just a little upset when they realized that he was not white. And it led to some really interesting discussions on how you select books for libraries and the value of having representation in the bookshelves. And I had not had that discussion before. I mean, I'm sure I did when I was working on my English degree, but not in library land. And I know it's all the conversation now. And I wish sometimes that was I was kind of going through library school now so I could be involved.
Well, I am going through library school now, and that exact conversation came up, and someone did the exact same thing and was talking about how the differences of that book and what different people get from reading that book. And so it was really interesting. Yeah. So it's still going on.
That was one of the challenges with the movie version of The Hunger Games, is there's a main character who dies, Rue. Sorry if this is a spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
And the actress is, I think, a biracial child. And people were like, that's not what she looked like in the book. And I honestly can't remember what she looked like in the book. But I thought she was, I thought they described her as being biracial, or at least being a black girl. Right. And I think it's an interesting opportunity to talk about what does it mean when you picture people that way. I don't think that means anything bad. I think the challenge comes through when someone tells you that's not what they look like. Can you expand your imagination? Is it a time to reflect on why you are upset if you feel that way? Can we have people swap out?
I totally agree with that. I love that. Me and Rochelle, the teen librarian, just had the discussion about The House in the Cerulean Sea. Because when I picked that up, I was like, I look like a children's lit, nothing super fancy. And then I read it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I absolutely love this book. And I actually listened to it, and I didn't always pay attention to all of the different parts of it. And I was like, I just pictured John Waters as the headmaster. And so it was just interesting how you get these things in your head that you think that they're talking about.
That's actually a book that I chose because of the cover.
Oh, really?
Can you describe
Interesting.
It is.
It looks very YA.
Yeah. It has a very precariously placed house at the very tip of, I assume, an island. If I remember correctly, and there's a road leading up to it. It's very illustrated.
Yes.
Okay.
Soft kind of looking, which I really like.
It fits the book, but it wasn't what I was expecting. It was one of the first times I picked up a book because we were doing it for a different book club that I'm in, and I was like, okay, I really want to read this. Everybody said it's good. And I was like, it just wasn't what I was expecting. And I thought, this is, you listen to it for a while and it sounds like a children's book. And then there's a few things that it's like, oh, that's not a children's book. So very interesting.
What role do books or stories play in bringing a community together or even creating that community?
I love that. In the class, one of the classes I teach, we had a conversation about where we get our information and how we relax. And sometimes some of the students felt a little embarrassed to talk about TV. And we talked about where we learned lessons. And people kept bringing up all of these reasons why they were influenced by something. And essentially what they were saying is stories are influential. And it doesn't really matter where it comes from. And I think we don't give enough credit to how storytelling persuades you and helps you grow empathy. I am okay with people who are not readers. I always say maybe you should listen, or maybe you haven't found the right thing. Books are kind of like vegetables. If you don't like broccoli, maybe you should try carrots. But I think sometimes we assume that if it is fiction, it's just, I think it depends on the person. Some people would say trash, or it doesn't help you grow.
Mm-hmm.
We don't give credit to what fiction does. Fiction may not be real, but it is true. So it's telling the story of an experience. I do not have to go to the moon. I would love to go to the moon. So anyone giving out tickets, call me. But I can read through the story or listen to the story of someone who has gone there. And it doesn't have to be, I was an astronaut 1968 and I went to the moon. Mm-hmm. It can be someone's imagination. And I can still experience the emotion, the joy, the fear, etc. And we also tell stories to persuade people. We can be hard-headed. I'm giving you a fact. You should change your mind. And data means nothing, especially out of context. I can almost argue any data, even if my data is wrong. But telling a story and connecting to my values is where I will grow, and maybe my opinion, my ideas. And I think that is one of the really wonderful things about fiction.
One of the things that I appreciate about how it brings a community together or creates that community is that it's a shared story.
Yes.
And it's a better, I think, a more interesting, at least, jumping off point than, wow, it's really nice out today.
You are so right. And it allows us to express values and opinions without making it personal, though people might take it personally. When I tell students about our common book, sometimes students graduate from high school and they have not had an opportunity to express their own opinion. They might be able to tell you why a video game, a movie, etc., is the best and give you reasons why you should do it, like it, whatever. But they haven't done it with something outside of maybe what they've discussed in their family, and maybe not to people who might not have the same opinion. So if we have a shared work, a book, a short story, whatever, it offers the opportunity to not neutrally, but to analyze something that is kind of objective. So we're all going to watch an episode of Scooby-Doo and talk about it through our personal lenses and our experiences. So you might think something's really awesome and I'm hurt by it. That's okay, because it's all about Scooby-Doo. And it allows you to practice. What do you do when you are hurt? How do you talk about it? Or how do you tell someone what they're saying isn't cool? And then how do you respond when someone just says, what you said wasn't cool, dude?
I like that. I like that response. That's wonderful.
I also think it's fun. I like to talk about things that are totally based on a story with the community and things inspired by. And controversial opinion, you do not have had to read the book for you to participate in the community building. When I am leading discussion, I'm going to give enough context that you understand where we're coming from, because maybe this is an opportunity for you to talk about a shared historical event or experience that other people are going to learn from. And sometimes that will lead people to read the book. Also, controversial opinion, audiobooks totally count as reading. That's why I say I'm reading with my earballs. And as a good librarian, I have no articles to back up what I'm saying. Just believe that I'm telling the truth and I'm always right. When you are learning to read, text is important. But once you are fully developed in your understanding, you're taking in data. I am going to argue listening or reading it is the same. And if we only value the written word, what it does is it privileges people who have the ability and the history for writing. So that means that cultures that don't have writing, that have an oral tradition, are not as valuable. Someone who has never had the ability or has lost the ability to read and write isn't as valuable. And I don't think that's true.
I like that. It's a part that people don't often think about, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks and that's really all I do anymore. I used to read like crazy and it just doesn't fit into my schedule anymore. And I find that I pay attention more, and not only to the book, but to other things when I'm doing it. It just gives me a little bit more focus, and I just find it more enjoyable.
It also, how you mentioned it, lowers that barrier to entry for a number of reasons, but people live busy lives now, but you can put an audiobook on in the car, use one of the library resources to stream it to your phone. I feel like I'm busy. I'm not really that busy, but I can listen to an audiobook and engage in other activities that I wouldn't be able to do because I'm sitting there reading a book. I still enjoy physical books, but having an audiobook, I can do crafty things or make dinner and still
I can clean out my yard like nobody's business while I am listening to an audiobook.
Listening to an audiobook reminds me of being a kid and learning that if you're quiet, the grown-ups will forget you're in the room and you can listen to the grown-up conversation. And you're sort of peering in as not always an outsider, but it's a window into someone else's life.
Mm-hmm. I like that. That's a good analogy. Mm-hmm.
It's also, you get to experience when you get home and you're not quite done with a chapter, circling the block or waiting in the driveway because you need to know how it resolves.
Exactly.
Yes, I listen to audiobooks and I will read them. So there are certain authors, I read the book fully and then I still listen to the audiobook and I bookmark my favorite spots and then I put it, that's what I listen to before going to bed. But I 2 weeks ago got an audiobook that I can't start yet because I know I don't have the time and I need to sleep. I have to have a full day to listen to it because I can't just turn it off.
Yes, I totally understand that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They've also added in more production now. So there are audiobooks that have music and Foley artist type sounds to go along with it. And one of the common issues with people who read are you don't know how to pronounce certain words because you've only ever seen them. And you put that onus on the person reading the audiobook, who is often either the author itself, which is a cool aspect, or someone who is trained and has a lot of experience reading, so it is that much more immersive than your internal monologue reading it.
The first good audiobook I ever read was on cassette tape, and it was the radio version of Left Behind. It was so scary. It was so scary to listen to. And I remember I was driving somewhere maybe 4 hours and having like, oh my gosh, I need the next cassette tape. I can't end it there. Several years ago, I was at a conference and I met the author Max Brooks, and he was talking about his book, Harlem Hellfighters. But I said, I wanted you to know I started reading World War Z and I quit because the audiobook was amazing. I couldn't keep reading it. I had to listen to it read by a cast. And he said that he loved that because that's what he does. And he talked about struggling with dyslexia and how audiobooks really helped him. And his latest release was something I didn't even bother getting the paper version because the audiobook, Devolution, amazing. I love it when they have a cast. I love it when they can do voices. That's another book that scared me.
The Graveyard book by Neil Gaiman. They just came out, and I think it's on Hoopla or Sunflower e-Library, and it's a full cast, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Neil Gaiman's American Gods, full cast. Amazing.
Is it? Ooh, that is on my list. I think I was saving that for October. Maybe.
That sounds good.
And this, The House on the Cerulean Sea, the guy who reads it does all of the voices, but he does every single voice differently. Kind of like the guy who did Harry Potter would do the voices differently, but this guy goes above and beyond, and it's very entertaining.
I search for audiobooks by narrator now because some people, they can do a whole host of voices, and anyone who's had a bad experience with an audiobook, and it's not because they don't like to listen, it's like, well, the narrator is terrible. Like, you just gotta...
You haven't heard the right one yet.
You just have to find ask people for their lists of narrators and search that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Our theme this month for ReadMHK is dystopian fiction. What is your favorite dystopian novel or story?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it slightly different, that it's not my favorite, but it was influential.
Okay.
I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. And I've seen, I think, every movie version of the book. So there is the I Am Legend with Will Smith. There is the Omega Man. And then there's 2 others that I can't remember. And the book is older, so I'm going to spoil it. So if you don't...
It's been around a while.
It's been around a while, at least 40 years. So just a spoiler alert, fast forward a couple minutes. So the story is there is a virus outbreak and people start turning into monsters and there's only one man left. And that's the main character. So in the movie with Will Smith, it's Will Smith and his dog. And he goes around killing all of the monsters. Things happen. But what you find out is, yeah, there were monsters, but they also changed and they became a whole society of people. And the main character was the real monster because they all changed. They created society and he was still killing them. And they are telling their children, don't be bad or the blah, blah, blah human will come and get you. He becomes this horrible legend. And it was mind blowing to me because usually, and what happens in the movies is it's too much for him to be the bad guy. So they change it so he's the hero or he gets saved. The vampires are vampires. So the idea that you could be doing what you think is the right things and you're the last man standing, you might be the last man standing, but there's a whole other group of people that you are causing great harm to and you are the problem, not them, was mind-blowing to me. I'd never read that before. And I've only read the book one time because that's one of those one time I got it type of stories. Other things happen. So do read it yourself. I only spoiled like the big thing. There's lots of other things.
There's lots of other things that go on.
But I went through a big dystopian phase. That was before my urban fantasy phase, which I'm still into.
Of course.
But I felt like that was so new and fresh, and I don't see it as much. And that's probably why I switched out of dystopian novels.
Okay. I have never read it, but I will definitely put that on my list.
My first introduction to that story was the graphic novel.
Oh, I didn't know there was one. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, and I was immediately hooked when they described, I think it was his neighbor maybe climbing around on the roof, but he was described as an Oliver Hardy of Laurel and Hardy fame. Like that was
really
his physical description was like Oliver Hardy. Any Laurel and Hardy reference, I'm a fan.
So then you see him slapsticking, falling down off the roof, or laughing and making those odd comments. That's funny.
Do you have a favorite dystopian novel or story?
Mine is a story, short story. I tend to go towards short stories anyway, just because I'm in and out. I'm always a little bit disappointed when I finish a book and find out it's part of a trilogy.
That's what
I've
I love.
committed myself to one book, and then it's not a bad thing, but then there's 2 more.
You're like, I'm only doing Star Wars A New Hope. I'm not doing the 20 other movies. It's done.
Yeah.
That's impossible.
Short stories are great because then you've got the whole thing wrapped up in like 20 minutes. But my first, I think it was pre-Vonnegut, my kind of introduction to dystopian was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that one had a similar kind of, it was a twist like I Am Legend in that it's this very pleasant society, and then you find out it's super dark. And it's not until the end that you realize that you think it's this normal, I can relate to this small town, everything, and then it goes terrible.
It's the OG Purge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which also a great series that's very terrifying.
I can't do
watch
that.
it. I
No.
can't do that.
And just knowing the story is enough. I don't need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't go there anymore. I used to be able to do that, and I can't watch that stuff anymore.
It's too close to reality, I think. That's the real scary part. Like they throw in all the visuals, which is gross, but I think the story itself is more scary than that because you realize how close it is.
Jan, are you a fan of dystopian novels?
I am. But I think back, and I used to, growing up, I was into Stephen King. And so, probably, I guess what really got me was The Stand. I mean, if you can call that dystopian.
I think it counts.
And I think I liked that because it was, like I was totally into Stephen King at the time. And I liked it because it was traveling. I like stories where people travel. And so you kind of get a feeling for the area where they're at. And it gave such humanity to a lot of the people who were in it. So
did you ever read travel logs literature? I
No.
think that's the genre. I'm going back to my American Lit days.
ooh, I like it.
So travel logs were people maybe lived and died 10 miles from where they were born. And you would read these novels where people would talk about their experiences in the Pacific and all these other things. And they were very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am remembering American Lit correctly, Melvin of the Moby Dick fame, his most popular book was Taipei, which took place in Polynesian islands. And because, it's like 5 pages and they're just describing what the island looks like, which
Oh, yeah.
made me think of your travels where they, you're interested in the stand because they're talking about where they're at. That's what these novels were like.
Ooh, I love that.
I did not care for that. And I don't know if it's because I can see a picture of the Polynesian islands or other places, or because I don't need that much description. Stephen King, I respect as an author, not my cup of tea because the descriptions are so lengthy when I want more dialogue.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
You should try Taipei and compare it to The
definitely.
Stand.
Okay.
I don't think there's evil. There could be. Please report back in your next podcast.
All right. I'll try to do that.
Somewhat related. I've always expected Stephen King to be straight horror novel, and I don't know.
I've never read one of his horror novels. I've read a lot of his books, but none of the horror novels.
I have always, that's what I associate him with, but I feel like every book I've read of his turns into, it's more sci-fi than horror.
Yeah, definitely more sci-fi.
That's the twist.
Sci-fi.
Yeah.
He's just great with describing people.
Yeah. I can't read him for psychological reasons.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I like to know the story. So
Yeah.
My younger brother will give me like a page by page detail of the whole thing. Like, go ahead and spoil it because I cannot read his books. I'll have nightmares.
You're like, I'm not going to read it,
Yeah.
so just tell me how
It's
it
okay.
ends. Yeah.
Going off of this, because the book this year is a dystopian novel, can you give us the origin story for K-State first book?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, once upon a time, there was a committee and a task force that did a thing. How can we help our first year students be successful? Out of that became a report. Sometimes when you put a lot of effort into a report, people thank you and they leave it on a desk. And doctors Emily Lenning and Greg Eislein are like, no, we put all this work into this. Let's not put it on a desk and let it get dust. And they put together several programs that ended up being a lot of things, including K-State First. So K-State First is our first year experience program, which has several components with the goal of helping our students be successful. Because when you're successful your first year, you're going to make it to the second semester, or first semester to second year, etc. So that is small classes, community of classes, a mentor program, and then the common reading program. And the motto for K-State First book is a campus on the same page. So that is a really short way of how the program came. Lots of details have been skipped, but we have been around for a while. And while first book was in 2010, it takes us a year to plan. And then our first year was we don't know what we're doing, let's start all over. So you could argue that we started in 2008 if you really wanted to.
Okay.
Inside scoop.
Nice.
Everyone thinks it's 2010, but really.
Right. Well,
It's dystopian.
the first year was like the first pancake that didn't come out very well, and you give it to the dog, and then you do the second one, and then it's like, okay, this is the one we give to company. Let's keep going. So our current pancake is doing pretty well.
Nice. I like that. The program has featured a lot of great books over the years, including The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, The Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and this year is The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. How do you go about choosing the book for this program?
I will start by telling you I didn't pick any of the books. I think a lot of people give me credit. So my view of leadership is when there is praise, give all the praise to the group. And when there's criticism, blame me. So if you were happy with what you saw, it's because we have a wonderful committee of students, staff, and faculty who read lots of books and went through some really big hoops that I forced people to go through to narrow down a list. So we pick a theme because there's so many books. In the first couple of years, we didn't do a theme, and that made it a struggle. So this year, we wanted a book on the theme of community. And we accept nominations from the community. So you can just email me or put it in a form. And our process is we do it like you would if you were looking for a book. The committee, I'll say, here's the summary. Do you want to read a sample? So that's like when you go to the bookstore and you turn it over and you look at the back. And then the next step in the summer is read the first 30 pages because that's where students are going to quit. So if you're in the bookstore, you might, or the library, you're going to look at the first couple of pages, see if you like it. So that's what we do. And there's some evaluation questions people have to answer. So I'm just like bombarding people with emails. Here's what we're reading this week. If you have time, read 1. If you have more time, read 4 samples, and then share your feedback. And then we take all that feedback, and then in December, JK, in August, December is a different part of it. We look at it all, and we narrow it down to the top 12, and it's members of our committee, but also I reach out to our stakeholders and our partners. So I'll say, hey, great person in housing and dining, look at this. Do you think that this is something that you could use in housing? Hey, person who teaches psychology, English, history, what do you think? Because some campuses, the book is just used in English, or it's just picked by faculty, or it's just picked by student life. And it's super important to me that this is a community experience, and I want it to be used in a classroom, outside of a classroom, in the art museum, in the library, at the public library. I want it to be something that can be used everywhere, and you do not have to like it. I tell people, especially students, professionals have no problem telling me why something they don't like it, but I have to oftentimes give students permission. So I will say, the book sucks is unacceptable. The book sucks because I don't like books that spend 5 days describing the landscape. I want dialogue. That's acceptable. So then we narrow it to 12, and we have more sets of challenging questions to narrow it down to 3. We share it with campus, and then we use that feedback to help us rank the books first, second, third. We do it that way because let's find out hypothetically, book 1, author plagiarized. We're not going to pick that book. We'll go to the second book or the third. And then we usually share that with our provost, who is our ultimate person. He takes our recommendations and considers it, and then he comes back and says, cool, what you did, or can we have a conversation about it? We don't announce the book until the spring because we want to have some ducks in a row. We like to be able to say, all right, here's the book and here's the events that we're planning. And then we start all over. We have one group that works on planning the book events for the year, and then we start over looking for the books next year.
Wonderful. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. I like structure. Again, the committee is doing the work. I am the circus master, and they are on the trapeze and juggling balls. Not that I am not participating, but it's their voice. Students are super important. I want people to be able to use it and be interested in, again, you don't have to like it, but if you are able to discuss the theories you are talking about in psychology, or you can go about talking about how this could help you develop skills in the career center, those are great ways of making connections.
I love that. I love that you can take this outside of just the classroom, that this can be a part of something bigger. Are you able to take comfort in the process and know you'll end up with a good book each year, or is there still some anxiety, wondering if this year will be the year everyone revolts?
That is such a great question. So I don't know about everyone revolts. One of the questions that people have to answer and on the selection committee is, what are the concerns, the issues that people are going to have about the book having not read it? Is our dean of students or our president going to get hate mail? Tell me all those things. And often people will say, oh, no one's going to have any concerns about this. I'm like, oh, that means that you're not looking at other perspectives. It doesn't matter what it is. I will have someone tell me I am stupid for selecting it. And then 2 minutes later, someone's going to say, I'm a brilliant person for selecting it. And I have to say, I'm not the only one who did it. We have a process. Anyone who wants to join can join the committee. We want them to be a member of the K-State community. That helps because we are primarily going to use it on campus. But I'm open to people outside of the community. But if anyone comes to me and complains, I invite them to join. Because if you care enough about the success of first-year students to send me an email or stop me in the student union to tell me why you don't like it, you care enough to help pick it next year. And only one time has someone said no. And all the people who join, maybe they didn't always love what we did, but they respected the process. And oftentimes, they ended up helping select what we did. There are years that are harder than others. So the year we picked The Hate You Give, my library caught fire. So it was already a little stressful.
Just a tad,
building on fire, having to find new locations, whatever. And if you're familiar with The Hate U Give, it's a hard book and there is some controversy. And before we go forward with any book, I always reach out to partners and I want to know, do you support this? What issues do you have? And for The Hate U Give, it was the Riley County Police Department and the K-State Police Department, as well as other groups on campus. So if there are people who call upset, will you help me talk about this book? Or if this book is selected, how will that affect your work on campus? And both of them were amazing partners. They were part of our planning. One of our police officers for K-State, when Angie Thomas, the author, came to campus, he was a part of the group who helped with event planning. He helped moderate the questions. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
And when parents called and they were upset, like, what did the police department say? I could say, they are our partners. They were aware before we made an announcement, and it would not have been successful if we hadn't done that. So when we picked the Marrow Thieves, before we make any announcement, I reached out to the Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance. I talked to the LGBTQ Resource Center, all of these groups, and saying, this is what we are looking at. Would you be our partner? What concerns do you have? And I want people to tell me, even if they don't believe it, what are your issues? Because I will get that email. And I like to be prepared.
I can imagine. And this book has quite a few of those issues.
It does. And I think if you read it and you are upset, I think you should be upset.
Yes,
and let's talk
absolutely.
about that.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of ways you might be upset, and all of them are legit. So I don't want anyone to feel that they can't speak up if they have some concerns. When I was talking about the book to faculty, they wanted to know if I liked it, and I had 2 answers. I think it's an exciting book. It also hurt my heart. And those 2 things happened at the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm excited that this is our first Indigenous author, and it's centered around Indigenous people. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about issues that we might not otherwise hear, because not that people can't sponsor an event, but this way we can pull a bunch of things together and really space out opportunities to learn more.
I love that. I listened to this one, and I was very happy to do that because especially for a lot of the Indigenous words that they used, there was some singing in it, and I just think that that really brought it to life. It's one that I'll listen to again. I will probably cry again, but I absolutely loved it, and it was a subject I did not know much about.
I have been butchering this quote forever, and I need to just write it down and carry it with me. Books can be a mirror reflecting back your life, a window letting you into someone else's life, or a sliding door. And I think for some people, this might be the first time they read a book telling these stories from the perspective of someone who's connected to that history intimately. And I think it's a great opportunity for us, especially if you are trying to read outside of your bubble. That's something that I'm trying to do. And like, again, my favorite genre is urban fantasy, but that doesn't mean I can't read authors who are a different ethnicity than me, or different nationality, different sexuality, and still be in that genre. And I hope that other people who maybe wouldn't pick this up. For example, I don't read young adult literature or YA. That's not my cup of tea. I like the people in my books to be in their 40s. I want them to be my age. I will take the like over 25. I'm open-minded. But reading this is helpful for me, especially since I spend time with the youth, and it's good to see things from their eyes and hear them talk about it with their voices.
I like reading things that I can relate to because it doesn't require a lot of effort to understand what's going on. You don't have to kind of do the legwork. You just get what they're talking about. But then reading something like The Marrow Thieves, where I have very little experience, it kind of sends you off on those tangents outside of the book. So you're not just reading the book, now you're reading the history beyond the book, and the real life history, not necessarily a fictional history in this dystopian setting. So that's another great thing about reading outside of your comfort zone or just outside of your typical experience, because it'll send you off into these other areas.
And I'm going to make an analogy. Some of us cannot find shoes our size at a regular everyday store because our feet are very big or very small. And some of us can't go to a store and buy clothes that fit us very easily because we are not the norm that dressmakers believe we should be to be at a regular store. Some people never have a problem, and maybe going to a new place where they have to struggle to find clothes will help them be empathetic. So for people who might have a hard time with reading something that is different, not to pick on you, but it's a great opportunity. I would like them to read it, and if they feel uncomfortable or out of place because I can't understand the words, think that this is maybe, if it's your first time, why haven't you experienced that before? And then what must it be like for people who have never seen themselves? I am not an Indigenous person, but I remember the first book I read where the girl was Black, and that was not the Can You Keep a Secret? It wasn't until I was almost in high school. And it never occurred to me that I could read a book where someone looked like me. So what a wonderful thing that there is this book that someone else can read who maybe has not had that brought to them. I also grew up with a different set of novels available to me. So hopefully this is not something that our young people experience today, but maybe it is. So like sit in that discomfort for a little bit and remember that some people are finally getting, like they are reading about their people. It is a mirror on their life.
That's the exciting part about these novels that are seeing more mainstream popularity. It's very encouraging because I can't relate to that at all because I have grown up with these very mainstream books that are my experience. And I do read outside of that, but that's different than not ever being able to read your experience or having one or two books here and there. So it's exciting for me that that is becoming easier now for people to find those novels.
We're trying to get people to not necessarily, here, read the book that we want you to read, because we're not all reading the same books. We're all going to be reading something within the same genre. So for October, it's read a book by Hispanic or Latinx author. So I've spent all day looking up different authors to put in there, and I found so many that I want to read. And it's about learning more about our community. And like we talked about earlier, how reading through the community helps bind us, because I think the more we understand each other, the more we can come together and have talks about other issues while being respectful of each other. And I think that's more important now than ever. And this gives us a chance to do something we all love to do, which is read or listen to books, however you like to do it, and, talk about what there is that is relevant to all of us in these books and what is something that you didn't know about. And that's what I love about this book. It's not one I would not have picked up by myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm introduced to a lot of books, and publishers now send me books. And like if you happen to be in my office, I have a bookshelf that's like, you want it, you have it, go for it. Because it's not possible for me to read all of them. But sure. I feel like this is my only opportunity to do reader's advisory like a public library does. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I want to, sometimes I get things, I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to read this. I haven't read it yet. No, but I know all about it. And you read it and tell me and pass it along, because there's so much out there. And it's exciting to have the opportunity to be there and capture all the knowledge.
I like that. Be there and capture all the knowledge.
With a net, like you're getting butterflies that you will release safely, not pin.
Not pin, yes. Thank you so much, Tara, for coming in and talking to us. And are there any other events that you would like us to know about?
Well, I hear there's an event that the Manhattan Public Library is doing next week that I would love people to come to. It's called MHK Reads, or ReadMHK, or go to the library and do some stuff with people about books. All three of those are accurate. You can Google it. It'll come up. And we'll talk about dystopian novels.
Yay. We'll have so much fun.
Thank you, Tara.
I'm honored to be included. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to learn more about ReadMHK or sign up for the program, you can go to our website, mhklibrary.org. There you can find book suggestions based on each month's themes, log the books you've read for the month, and find information on upcoming programs.
And if you'd like to contact us, send an email to refstaff@mhklibrary.org. Thanks for listening.